Peace officers are unlike citizens. While a citizen is permitted and sometimes even encouraged to simply walk away from trouble, chaos, and conflict, a peace officer has a moral, ethical, and even legal duty to intervene and restore the peace. As a line from a popular cop movie illustrates, by law, I am unable to walk away. This is a truthful statement. In the state of Texas, an aspect of the legal duty for a peace officer to intervene can be found in the Code of Criminal Procedure. According to the Code of Criminal Procedure, when informed in any manner, for instance by dispatch, that a threat has been made by one person to do some injury to himself or to the person or property of another, including the person or property of his spouse, it is the duty of the peace officer to prevent the threatened injury, if within his power, and, in order to do this, he may call in aid any number of citizens in his county. You might be slightly puzzled at the part that states the peace officer may call in aid citizens of the county to prevent the threatened injury. Keep in mind, the Code of Criminal Procedure was originally authored in the early 1960s, when there were far less officers and less population, and it wasn't necessarily the most peaceful of times. While a peace officer statutorily retains this authority, it's highly unlikely he or she would ever actually do this. The Code of Criminal Procedure continues. In order to prevent a threatened injury, the peace officer may take such measures as the person about to be injured might. So if a person would be justified in using a certain level of force to prevent from being injured, the Code of Criminal Procedure indicates the peace officer is justified in using that same level of force. This is not a green light for the officer to use any level of force to prevent the threatened injury. The Code of Criminal Procedure clarifies the peace officer must use the amount of force necessary to prevent the commission of the offense, and no greater. Everything we've spoken of to this point involves the peace officer's duty when he or she is informed of a person threatening himself or another. The Code of Criminal Procedure addresses a related situation by stating, whenever in the presence of a peace officer or within his view, one person is about to commit an offense against the person or property of another, including the person or property of his spouse, or to injure himself, it is the peace officer's duty to prevent it. Just as before, the Code of Criminal Procedure states, for this purpose, the peace officer may summon any number of citizens of his county to his aid. The Code of Criminal Procedure states, the conduct of peace officers in preventing offenses about to be committed in their presence or within their view is to be regulated by the same rules as are prescribed to the action of the person about to be injured, and the peace officer may use all force necessary to repel the aggression. So again, if a person would be justified in using a certain level of force to prevent from being injured, the Code of Criminal Procedure indicates the peace officer is justified in using that same level of force. Now, the Code of Criminal Procedure is making some very general statements here about the use of force by civilians and peace officers. The significant portion of statutory law that applies to both use of force by peace officers and citizens is found in Chapter 9 of the Texas Penal Code. So, to summarize everything we've reviewed in this section of the Code of Criminal Procedure, whenever a peace officer is notified by any means, or the peace officer sees a person threatening to injure himself or another person, it's the duty of that peace officer to prevent it using the amount of force necessary and no greater. As we previously mentioned, by law, I am unable to walk away.